Well, I'm not going to be quite as dynamic as your last two speakers, but I do think I have a little bit of information that might be of interest to you. Being from Oklahoma, that's one of the states where the party has never been on the ballot, and that's because the ballot access laws are quite difficult. But we all know that that can change. You know, we've seen that happen in North Carolina and other places around, so that doesn't mean we can't keep trying. And so Frank had asked me to visit about that because we've been working on this in Oklahoma for at least 15 years, and we have had some measure of success, and I'll share that with you as we go through here. But, you know, the other parties have the same problem that we do, of course, the Libertarians and the Greens and whatever other party might be in your state, but, you know, they can be our friends. We want to build coalitions with them and work on this issue of ballot access where we can. So, you know, the way you'd get started is to make contact with those other folks and talk about the idea of putting together a bill through the legislature to try to get the ballot access laws changed. And so you need to meet with them in advance of the legislative session and come up with a strategy and a common message and get your act together, you know, and be sure and include Richard Winger with Ballot Access News in that, because he's the country's expert on ballot access. You know, he is with the Libertarian Party, but he has been a great friend to the Constitution Party, and I think heard Frank say he talks with him almost weekly sometimes. So Richard, I've spoken with him many times. In fact, he came to Oklahoma probably 10 or 12 years ago to help us develop our strategy and plans on how to get our state laws changed. So, you know, you need to do some homework. You've got to understand the ballot access laws in your area, but also in the surrounding states. You know, you can use what's going on in your neighboring states to help you there. And in fact, in Oklahoma, that's what we found. These statistics are a little bit old, but when we put this together about 10 years ago, I'll give you some numbers here. As far as the number of signatures on the petition that were required per million residents is the way we chose to calculate the numbers. So in Oklahoma at the time, we had to have 20,000 signatures per million residents of the state. Okay, 20,000 signatures per million residents, okay? So to compare that to Texas, they needed 2,000 signatures per million. So Oklahoma was, just basing it on population, Oklahoma was 10 times higher requirement than Texas. And Oklahoma and Texas have a big feud, and we're always trying to do better than them and that sort of thing. So we wanted to definitely point that out. All right, then, you know, for instance, Kansas was 6,000. Missouri, 1,700 signatures per million residents. So you want to gather those types of numbers and be able to compare how you look in the area that you're in, you know, your neighborhood, so to speak. And so you put that together with a flyer. That's what I've been looking at here. And try to help them understand where the state stands in relationship to the neighborhood. So we would go around, and there's some other information on here, go around and share that with legislators all during the year. And so the other thing you've got to do, of course, is get a bill proposed. You need help getting that prepared, and so you need authors, but you also want to get co-authors. So if you're fortunate enough to find a author in the Senate and an author in the House, or whatever your state may call it, the Assembly or whatever it might be, so you've got to have your authors or your sponsors, but you also want co-sponsors or co-authors. And that's real important, because if you just go ask them to support it, one of the things that they'll say is, well, if it comes out of committee, then I'll look at it. You know, we've got 2,000 bills we're looking at, and I can't look at all of them. But if you go to them and ask them to co-sponsor and help explain it to them and bring to their attention the inequity that you've seen, that you've documented here, then you'll have a better chance of getting them to be a co-author or a co-sponsor. So that's an important part of the whole thing. And during this process, you're building relationships with your state rep and your state senator, and you really want to focus on those people who your Constitution Party members have as representatives and senators, because, you know, they do listen to their constituents, you know. if I live in the central part of the state and I'm calling someone out in the northeast, they don't really care that I am, passionate about ballot access or whatever the issue might be. But if they get contacted by their constituents, the people who vote for them, they really pay attention. And it might surprise you, and Janine's the grand lobbyist here in the room. Besides the ballot access signature lady that you've heard about, she's also excellent at lobbying the state legislature. So really, she ought to be up here giving the speech. But nevertheless, we've taken up her time already, so you're stuck with me. But anyway, so when you call and talk to your legislator about it, that makes a difference. In fact, in Oklahoma, as we were doing that sort of thing, one legislator told us that he got 2 calls from people in his district, and all of a sudden that became his #1 issue, just from 2 calls. So you need to stay in touch with them. And one of the things that I'll share with you is that even though it may seem like a long, lengthy process, and it is, you can never quit. You've got to keep going. I mentioned early on that we've been making efforts in Oklahoma for over 15 years, and the progress that we've made is essentially we've cut the requirement in half. So now we only have to have 35,000 signatures for Oklahoma, which is still way too high. But also there's the other number that's important to us, and that's how you retain ballot access. How many votes you have to get to be able to be on the ballot for the next time. Well, in Oklahoma, it was 10% of the vote of a statewide race. So that's now been cut down to 2.5%, which is still a high number, but much better than it was. And so, when we started this process, the Libertarian Party had not been on the ballot in Oklahoma for a long, long time. They did get on the ballot this last time. They had enough funds to hire the petitioners and go get the signatures. I think they turned in around 50,000 signatures, and they got on the ballot. It's, as Frank's going to explain to you later on, as far as the priorities for getting the party on the ballot in various states, we're going to look at those that are the least expensive and require the fewest signatures. So Oklahoma is still going to be well down towards the bottom of the list, but it still means that we have a lot of work to do. So one of the things you want to do, though, is continue to visit your state capital often, visit with legislatures, get to know them, and develop relationships with them. And I brought with me just handouts of the various things that we prepared. We had a press release. Some of you that were in Dallas heard our speaker. Now I'm drawing a blank on his name. I should have written it down. From Oklahoma, Charles Key. He was one of the sponsors for a bill to reduce ballot access for us about 10 years ago, and agreed to do a press conference with us and that sort of thing. And so all the different party leaders, Libertarian Party, Constitution Party, Green Party, we all gave short presentations there at that press conference, and we continue to send out press releases and call it to attention. Surprisingly, the largest newspaper in the state of Oklahoma for probably the last 12, 15 years it has written editorials in favor of reducing the ballot access requirements in Oklahoma. But the legislature still hasn't seen the light, but we're going to continue to bring it to their attention. So I have these types of handouts and material that I'll be glad to share with you. Actually, I'll email them to you, and that way they'll be in a Word document, and you can revise them as you need. But those are primarily the things, the thoughts that I wanted to share with you. I'll pause here and see if there's any questions or anything that you'd like me to address. And I do have one story to close with, but any questions, comments, thoughts that you want to share? Okay, then you're going to get to hear a story. Oh, here we go. Here's the question.
Can you give an overview of other states and as far as the top states that is, where they have real restrictive laws and any progress that's been made?
I'm not familiar with the different efforts that may be going on in other states, but as far as the difficulty, in your packets there is a listing of the ballot access requirements. Frank's going to address that, I think, is it later this afternoon?
Also, Jim could probably share what happened in Pennsylvania.
Okay. Jim, did you want to share with us what's going on or what happened in Pennsylvania recently? Well, I know, but I'm opening this up to get more information from wherever it might be.
We tried the legislative route. We had a state senator who was sponsoring the bill, and he even then became chairman of the committee, which was where the bill was placed. And somehow things never just happen. I have some real suspicions. He seemed like he's a friend of ours, but he never got that bill out of committee. This happened year after year. We filed suit back in 2012. That's eventually how we got things straightened out in Pennsylvania. And this judge, first of all, the judge threw out our petition or threw our complaint, and then we went to the Third Circuit. The Third Circuit reversed, came back to him again. That time he did it right, and he found that the law was unconstitutional, but they still didn't change the law. So he was actually giving the legislature deadlines. You know, either you change the law by this date, or I'm going to set something. And the legislature still didn't do it. They just refused to act. So eventually, we got down to 5,000 signatures as a requirement in Pennsylvania, because, which, you know, I've got some problems with that method, but it's, you know, if the legislature won't work, what do you do? And so it's a case where we are really operating under a judicial fiat, I guess you might say, where the judge said, okay, until the legislature changes the law and makes it constitutional, you'll need to get 5,000 signatures for a statewide race. But
How many was required before this?
well, it varied from year to year, because it was like 2% of what the top vote getter got in the last statewide election. And that varied from somewhere in the low 20s to 1 year it was like 70,000. So it was, you know, it was a guessing game is what it's going to be, depending on what happened in the last statewide race. Made a big difference. I will say one other thing, that talked about retaining ballot access, and Pennsylvania is still the hardest state for that, because to retain ballot access from one election to the next, you actually have to become what they define as a major party, which the definition of that is having 15% of the total registrations in the state. And as Richard Winger likes to point out, that would mean that in Massachusetts, the Republicans would not be a major party, and Utah, the Democrats would not be a major party.
Thank you very much, Jim. Appreciate that. I mentioned to you that we can never quit. Well, I just want to tell you a story about a grandmother who attended a state convention. This was actually in Texas. When I was first joined the party, I was in Texas, and we had a state convention there. And at the end of that convention, actually before I get to there, we had Flip Benham, who was a very strong pro-life leader that many of you might know. He was a speaker there, and we had a lot of other great presenters. Daniel New from Texas was there, of course, and anyway, it was just a great day of inspirational speeches and a lot of good things. And so June Burnett was there. She was a new party member. This was back before 2000. And so at the end, we sang the song, God Bless America. And I think y'all know that sometimes we sing that here as well. Well, at the end of the convention, she came up to us, those of us that were leading the convention, and she said, I want you to know that, let's see, my husband died not long ago. He was a minister, and we have been in the pro-life fight for years. And she said, I have not been able to sing that song before today. And she said, I now have hope. For the first time in over 20 years, I sang that song. So today was very important, and she really appreciated that. And so it's things like that that cause us to keep going. So one last thing I'll leave with you is that there was a quote that I saw not long ago that reminded me of our friend Janine Hansen. And it says, do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail. Thank you all very much.